Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. There was a lawsuit filed in Washington, D.C., and we have with us one of the co-counsel. It is brought by the ACLU and CASA and a number of individuals. Austin, thank you for joining us. What is the lawsuit about?
Sure. So the lawsuit is brought by several organizations, including the ACLU, the organization that I work with, which is called the Amica Center for Immigrant Rights, the Washington Lawyers Committee, the National Immigration Project, and Covington Law Firm. We've got lots of folks on this case. CASA is co-counsel and a plaintiff organization, alongside four individuals who have each in the last month and a half been arrested by immigration authorities without a warrant and without probable cause to believe that they lack status in the United States and that they're a flight risk. The premise of this lawsuit is that ICE's policy and practice of indiscriminately arresting people in DC without probable cause violates federal immigration law, and in fact clearly violates a section of immigration law, 8 USC 1357, which says that they must have, if they want to arrest someone without a warrant, they must have these two prongs of probable cause. They must have probable cause to believe the person lacks status in the United States, and probable cause to believe that they are a flight risk such that they can't just go get the warrant. They're doing neither of those things in the vast majority of circumstances. And that's why we are suing them, seeking an injunction to put an end to this arbitrary policy and practice.
So, as far as you understand it, what is the practice? Are they just driving into neighborhoods and picking up people who look Hispanic? What has been the experience of those neighborhoods and those individuals?
Yes, that's exactly right. So there's many different ways that this plays out, but at its core, it is trying to meet their arrest quota numbers, right? So as you may know, Stephen Miller and others have arbitrarily set a number of daily arrests that ICE must accomplish. So low-level ICE officers, to keep their jobs, frankly, are just trying to do everything they can to pad those numbers. So yes, they're going into areas that they perceive to be heavily immigrant, Mount Pleasant, Columbia Heights, and arresting people essentially if they look Latino. They are also doing traffic stops, so stopping people based often on some pretense, and then having an immigration agent or someone deputized to do immigration enforcement accompanying whoever's doing the traffic stop to then go and arrest the person for immigration reasons. They are having checkpoints where they'll pull people over at random, or not so at random, if based on the color of their skin, ask for identifying documents and arrest people. So there's many different ways that it's playing out, but at its core, it is a policy and practice of just trying to arrest as many people as they can without regard for whether it's even appropriate to detain the person, whether they even lack status in the United States, and if they do lack status, whether it's they are a flight risk such that detention is necessary.
Now, if they are picking people up, some of the people, as you say in the complaint, are in the process of obtaining asylum or they have TPS status or other things. What happens then? Do they have to somehow prove their status? And what happens if they don't have their papers with them?
Yeah, so I think the most striking example of this is our lead plaintiff, the one identified by name. His name is Jose Escobar Molina. He is, I think, the embodiment of the DC immigrant population. As you may know, DC is one of the few cities in the country where the Hispanic majority is Salvadorans, people from El Salvador, or at least it was as a few years ago. So there's many Salvadorans and many folks with TPS. Temporary protected status for El Salvador has existed continuously since 2001, and he has had temporary protected status for that entire time, for basically his entire time living in the District of Columbia for 25 years. If someone has TPS, it is statutorily illegal for ICE to detain them. They know that, but they don't care. So in this case, he was leaving his apartment building in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of DC, and ICE agents came up and just arrested him while he was literally pleading with them, saying, "I have papers on papers," to which the ICE officers or whoever they were responded, "Shut up, bitch, you are illegal." So this is the kind of thing that's happening. Essentially, they are arresting first and then asking questions later. In this case, they arrested him, held him overnight in a packed cell in Chantilly, with barely any food and water and horrible conditions. And then finally, the next day, an ICE supervisor realized that this person has TPS and it's illegal to detain them and released him and actually apologized, saying, this was a mistake. These are untrained new agents. So this is exactly an example. Now, other people may not be released, right? Either because ICE never realizes that they have status, or they do not, in fact, have status. And so some folks remain detained, and many might be deported. But the point here is that before ICE is going to arrest someone, they need to have the probable cause to believe that arrest is appropriate, not just arrest someone randomly because they're Latino and then figure it out later. That's what they're
Right.
doing. That policy and practice violates U.S. immigration law.
Now, our readers and listeners who follow this very closely will remember a similar suit that was brought in Los Angeles. And the judge there found you can't just go around picking up people who look Hispanic or speaking Spanish. This went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and without an opinion, simply by a per curiam matter on the emergency docket, the Supreme Court lifted the stay. They did not rule on the merits. And although Justice Kavanaugh gave this very long explanation seeming to justify this kind of practice, we don't know if ultimately the Supreme Court thinks this is okay or not. How does that Supreme Court action, I wouldn't even say it's a decision because it's really not, play into this? And do ICE people now believe that they have a green light to continue this practice nationwide?
So obviously the decision you're referencing, Vasquez-Perdomo, if you want to call it a decision, is evidently wrongly decided, racist, and horrible. But I want to be clear that as our lawsuit currently stands, it is clearly distinct from the claims there. In that lawsuit, the claim that went up to the Supreme Court and that the Supreme Court ostensibly ruled on in some way was a Fourth Amendment claim about reasonable suspicion to stop people in the first place. And basically the debate was what factors constitute reasonable suspicion. We are not at present raising that claim. This is not about the stops. It is currently about the arrests. And it is about the statute that says what ICE must have, what probable cause they must have, and what individualized assessment they must do to arrest someone without a warrant. That claim was not passed on in any way in the Supreme Court. So we do not believe that that decision will impact our lawsuit and preliminary injunction as it currently stands. That said, if we ever take action on the stops in addition, we think that the circumstances here are distinguishable from Vasquez-Perdomo for a number of reasons, which we will get into if we do take that action in the future.
Understood. You're asking for class certification, two different types of classes. Can you explain who those people are and potentially how many people might be affected by this if you do win class certification?
Sure. So we're actually seeking a class certification for one main class, but two subclasses. And so the main class, which we believe should be certified, is all people who have been or will be arrested in the District of Columbia without a warrant and without a pre-arrest individualized assessment of probable cause to believe that they lack status and/or are a flight risk. There have been at least 940 people arrested in the District of Columbia since August 11th, when essentially the federal takeover began. So at minimum, right, that's how many people have been arrested, and surely more since that number was published about 2 weeks ago. We are alleging and believe we have the evidence to suggest that the vast majority of those arrests were done pursuant to this policy of practice of arresting without a warrant and without this probable cause. So we believe the class numbers in the thousands. And we have identified at least 16 people who have experienced these unlawful arrests and have essentially spoken to us about that.
Got it. And the subclasses, tell us a little bit about that, how they're different than the larger number.
The subclasses basically just correspond to each of the prongs that ICE is failing to do. Probable cause to believe that they lack status, and probable cause to believe that they are a flight risk. So in every single case that we've ever observed and documented in the case of all four of our plaintiffs and other people who have talked about their experiences, there's absolutely no assessment of their individualized circumstances that would constitute an individualized assessment that they are a flight risk. And in most cases, if not the vast majority, there's also not probable cause for to believe that they lack status in the United States.
Now, I've been talking about ICE, but do we know exactly who these people are? What we have seen is that they're masked, they're not identified. Who are these people who are grabbing people off the street? Do we even know?
That's a great question, and that's why I am often saying government officials, agents, and not ICE. Sometimes we know it's ICE, but as we know, ICE has this horrible, cowardly practice of wearing masks or just being in plain clothes. So most of the reports we have heard of, at least some of the agents that participate in these arrests, typically it's a swarm of agents in a very aggressive way, are plain clothes or masked such that they're completely unidentifiable. Every once in a while, someone will show a badge or be wearing something to indicate. And so if you look at the complaint, there was a DEA agent who carried out one of the arrests, stops and arrest, a border patrol agent who carried out one of the stops and arrests, or at least someone wearing that garb. It's really unclear because this is a full-on assault of federal law enforcement where various agencies of the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Justice and even the Park Police, right, have been engaged in these procedures. So it's not clear at any given time whether this is an ICE agent or some other federal agent that has been deputized some authority ostensibly to carry out immigration arrests.
Now, we've all seen some of these videos of arrests in other places, smashing a window, physically grabbing a woman off the street. What is the level of force that your plaintiffs have experienced? And is that in and of itself a concern?
Yes, the level of force is very much a concern. It is not being directly challenged in this lawsuit, but it is significant. So again, to use the example of Mr. Escobar Molina, he is still in significant pain. He's an older man, and he's still in pain in his arms and legs because of the physical toll that the arrest took on him. So commonly they will handcuff someone immediately, push them against a car or onto the ground, wrestle with them, right? He's still in physical pain, and then there's an emotional burden, right? He's still having nightmares about what happened to him. And now he fears for his U.S. citizen sons who look like him, right? If this can happen to him when he's just walking down the street because he's Hispanic and even though he has status, it can easily happen to his sons who look the same as him, happen to be U.S. citizens. But if this is the policy and practice of ICE, then nothing is stopping them from arresting U.S. citizens who are Latino or they otherwise perceive to be an immigrant. And that's precisely one of the reasons why this is such a problem.
Now, if you get your class certification, or even if you don't, frankly, and you're just proceeding on behalf of these individuals, you will get discovery. And what will you be looking for? It's interesting that you said that a supervisor said these guys aren't getting training, they're new. So what kinds of information would you be getting? Would it be instructions? Would it be anything looking like a quota system? Would it be the level of training or non-training? What would you be able to uncover?
The quotas are publicly reported. They're bragging about them. That's abundantly clear. We know that there are massive quotas and that they're trying to fill them. But yes, we are alleging and believe that there clearly are policies and practices, um, basically instructing officials to go out and make these arrests without having um, the the probable cause to do it, without doing this individualized assessment. In fact, if you look at the complaint, excuse me, there was an article came out a week or two ago about how ICE has dispensed with typical forms that ICE agents have to do before they go out in the field to conduct an arrest. And they said that they dispensed with this because they want to boost their numbers and get more arrests, right? And so there is no pre-work being done. They're just going out in the street, arresting people to pad their numbers. Again, arrest first, ask questions later. So we believe that will come out in discovery if we get to that point.
So have you been assigned a judge, and how quickly will you get a hearing on the preliminary injunction?
We've not been assigned a judge yet, as far as I know, unless it happened in the last 30 minutes. It's unclear when a hearing on a preliminary injunction would be. Like I said, we intend to move for a preliminary injunction as soon as next week. It is not set in stone because we are gathering more and more evidence, hearing more and more stories. But the timeline is unclear at this point.
You've been really very generous with your time, Austin, on a busy day when you literally have just filed this lawsuit. To us, bigger picture, let's take a step back. Why should Americans care about this? Someone might say, oh, I'm not Hispanic, or I'm not a El Salvadoran, or I'm a citizen. What larger principle, what larger constitutional issue are we facing right now?
We are currently facing what is elements of fascism, right? It is a police state that has unlimited discretion to go out and arrest whoever it wants. So people can say, I'm a US citizen, I'm not Latino. Doesn't matter if you're a US citizen, if you happen to be Latino. And frankly, this can happen to non-Latino folks. It could happen to anyone that they perceive to be Latino or they perceive to be an immigrant, right? So everyone should care about this, not only because of constitutional principles upon which this country was built, but also for their own personal safety. I, of course, feel more safe than other people because I am a white man and a US citizen working a white collar job, but I do not feel safe in this city that I've lived in for 10 years because of the fascist police state we are faced with. So, the administration has come in saying we are trying to save DC, right, from crime. I felt perfectly safe before they came in. I'm unsafe now. And folks in immigrant communities, Latino folks, whether they're US citizens or not, definitely do not feel safe. That is a major problem. It's disruptive of the DC's economy and social fabric. And it clearly violates the US Constitution and immigration law, and it has to end now.
Austin, we cannot thank you enough for coming to us. We are going to be following this case. It is a case that we at the Contrarian have been waiting for because we're all very much aware of the indiscriminate or discriminatory, whichever way you look at it, kind of arrests that are going on. And thank you for the work that you're doing and all of your litigation partners. Folks, this is what democracy takes a village. And we thank you for all you're doing. So we will look forward to having you back soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.